I'm going to try to finish the the colleagues part of this process in terms of papers. And in particular, I mean, by now you should start to get a bit bored because you're going to hear some of the same things again. And so if you like, we're talking about the same person, and it's always nice when you hear people speaking, you think, ah, yes, I recognize exactly who we're talking about here. And in particular, I was very taken by a note in the chat, which then came to me via my phone, because this is the wonders of hybrid technology, from Linda Lewis, who's online. And I'm really pleased that you're there, Linda. And her message was she was appreciating that she recognized the person and she agreed with what was being said. And so I think that's where I'm going to sort of keep on going as well. So firstly, I want to tell you about two of Geoffrey's superpowers, and they really are quite amazing superpowers. And I think one of them comes from his CV, from being entrepreneurial, because I think if he wasn't in academia, he'd probably be someone like Jeff Bezos and have a rocket to the moon or something like that, because he was hugely entrepreneurial. And I think both in terms of when he worked at Topshop after school, when he went into accounting training, and then he went into academia, and at each stage he bit off these really sort of big bites with a great vision that were required and came through and brought them home. And so I want to give you three very concrete examples of when this has worked. Shell and the related work, which is his very early work, which is where I first met him, because as academics, you meet people through their papers first, and then you meet them later on. I then want to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, which is work that he and I did together. And then I want to come back to what Brandon was talking about, the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosures, which is actually a pretty big deal of something that's going on. And then I'll also say a little bit about building institutions with him. And so there's quite an interest in gap spotting. And so this is a sad wee rat that's unwittingly made it into the news. And the reason for this, this poor fat rat being stuck in a manhole, being rescued by firefighters, is that one of the things I really miss about Geoffrey is that I don't get pictures of unicorns coming across my WhatsApp so much anymore. I don't get pictures of quite mad wee things that we see and we'd pass between each other and we'd spend a bit of time giggling about it. And I like giggling. Geoffrey liked giggling as well. And that was one of the things I really, really enjoyed about him. But I also want to say that this is actually sort of quite serious as well, because there's a big academic conversation about gap spotting. And in particular, these two colleagues here are looking at the ways of constructing research questions, and they're contrasting gap spotting with problematization. And they're very right to do so, because there is a sense in which, and I don't think these two colleagues do this, but from time to time, this worry comes up in academia that we spend time surveying existing fields and finding little holes that no one else has filled in. And we spend our time filling in those holes, or repeating a study, but in a very, very slightly different place, or repeating a study with a very small factor changed. And that whilst that is important, and it's important to layer knowledge of that sort, it doesn't really take a field forward as such. And so what the people will talk about is thinking about not so much gap spotting as horizon breaking. And I think Geoffrey's work really demonstrates how you can open up new horizons and find new things in them. Another way of framing this is the idea about edgelands and about a pristine center and an uncomfortable periphery. And I think Ian's conversation in particular highlighted that when we, sort of our older folk here, when we all started out in social environmental accounting, it was thought to be, well, if you want to, you can do that, but you clearly don't want a career, or just don't do it. And in some ways, one of the very edifying things about being in the field now, people saying, oh, you guys had it sussed. And I don't think we thought we had it sussed 30 years ago, but our interest in that field is now becoming much more mainstream and is becoming into the center. It's not on the edge anymore. And I think that's in part due to the efforts of many, many people, including Geoffrey. And the idea about the center then and what that looks like in some forms of scholarship it says that theory is the source of the questions. Now, that's not to say that theory is bad, nor that Geoffrey wasn't theoretically strong. And I think Brandon really illustrated that so well about how he had that strength in theory. But it's that theory is a great deal more than that. Likewise, it's not following standard approaches. It's not finding questions that are only of interest to academics. And I think what I really liked, and there's many, many papers of his that I liked, is that there is one where he's titled Celebrating Advances in LGBT plus Diversity in the Accounting Profession, Not Letting Idealistic Purity Become the Enemy of Progress. And so in that respect, if you like, he knew that we had incomplete work. And even if we get better at risks around climate change, we still have incomplete work. But we go back, we revisit it, we refine it. We don't sort of say, oh, it's no good, so it isn't going to be, yeah, we shouldn't be doing it. And this is where I think of Dee. So Dee's now going to go, oh. Dee said something to me the other day that could have been Geoffrey speaking to me, which I really, really appreciated. He said, if you want to be right, be super critical, because you'll always be right. And so actually doing something different from that is really hard, but is also really important. And so I don't know how much of his mentoring rubbed off on you. I think it actually came from you, but you're the right sort of person, because he would have mentored you into that, but you were there already. So thank you for saying that. You didn't know you were making me so happy at just that moment. Okay. It's also, I think, come through in his British Accounting and Finance Association plenary, which actually was potentially quite rude to a lot of people, he intended it as such, and it was also very good. So asking us not to get into those self-referential, peer-reviewed echo chambers. And that's a harsh and tough message to hear, but it's something that we ought to hear and we ought to guard against for ourselves as well. So I want to go back to what was my first encounter with Geoffrey, looking at his work in Shell in the late 1990s. And I'm going to start on the right-hand side of a slide, perhaps a wee bit perversely. So one of his early studies, he looked at 100-year content analysis, which looked at a broad range of Shell's corporate reports. 100 years times a broad range gives you an idea of the amount of material that was brought together and synthesized in order to be able to come to actually produce that paper and to be able to say something about it. I always think of papers as having sort of arcs, and some papers, and I look at their citations to tell me what kind of papers they are. So some papers are sort of like they hit hot, you get a bit of a chatter off them, and then no one ever looks at them again, okay? I've got other papers that no one ever looked at, as far as I can tell, because no one ever cited them. So they're sort of flatlining from the outset. But this particular paper, which is his best-selling paper, is still getting really solid citations. So this year, so far, 43 citations. So that means 43 people found this paper to be informative enough to inform their current work. Last year, it got 47 citations. So it's doing solid ongoing work some 20, 21 years after it was written. But of course, when it was published, the work probably happened another 2 or 3 years before that. So that depth of insight and imagination about what you could say is coming from a long way back, and it remains relevant today. The second paper then, which is published in AOS in 2004, although the work again was much earlier. And what really struck me about going back to this paper, it was the first paper that when I realized I needed to know Geoffrey Unerman. It was this paper that sort of helped me get there. I don't know if you remember your first internet search. I'm now going to skim over all the young people, okay? I'm just going to leave you be. But I remember my first internet search. It was in 2000. I just started working at the University of Aberdeen. And of course, there wasn't Google at that stage. I had to ask Jeeves, because that's all you had available. And I had no idea what I was doing, but it was sort of like, it was something like electric on the screen. So I sort of like tapped some things in and thought, okay, I'll press return. I am a slow learner, I will give you that as well. I'm sure other people were doing it earlier. And I found some things on the internet. to be fair, I didn't actually know what had just happened. I mean, whereas now you can't get through 5 minutes of your day without doing that. So he's looking at stakeholder dialogue through the internet, not through Twitter or a chat or something like that, but through a bulletin board, a forum that Shell put together at a time that I don't think I even really knew what the internet was. So again, it tells you about how early that work was. And there's some really iconic things in this paper. I've been rereading it again recently. And I'll quote this as a direct quote from him. There has been little, if any, debate within the practitioner or the academic literature regarding the extent to which internet-based stakeholder dialogue can contribute towards a democratic determination of corporate, social, environmental, economic, and ethical responsibilities. That is so fresh. It could have been written, yesterday, but also it really exemplifies him seeing something that's really important to look at and going to look at it earlier. So I think that there's been little, if any, as a conversation starter that he had often in papers and brought to the fore. The other thing about this paper is just, the volume of it. So he's looked at, this is definitely pre-Twitter. So people could put text messages in of up to 8,500 characters to say what they thought of Shell. And then somebody from Shell would write back to you. And so, indeed, I don't think I said, bugger off. I don't think that was their standard sort of response. But it was, if you like, thinking about this accountability, there was this negotiation of accountability in a public domain. They didn't censor, or at least it didn't appear that they censored who got to post. And then, if you like, there was this live experimentation with accountability. And of course, they were feeling very vulnerable at that time because they'd come through both the Brent Spar and some of the issues in Nigeria. And so they kind of woke up one morning and found themselves the bad guys when they thought they were the good guys. So they're having a real troubled time doing this work. So from 1999 through to 2000, they received about 1,500 to 3,000 posts per month. And what he did is he went through all of those posts for a 2.5 year period up until the 20th of October 2001. He read them, he analysed them, and he put them in a structure in order to understand what's going on. And one of the sort of quite difficult jobs that Desna and I did in the last wee while is that we sorted out his office, and we found this. And I in some ways, I don't know if anyone's going to be using these ever again, but I cannot dispose of them. A 10-inch stack of materials analysed with all of that working out from that huge data source that he brought together, and then distilled it all down into this paper. Rich conceptualization, meticulous working methods, and really impactful solutions from it. And I'm going to read you the last thing that he wrote in that, in terms of what he found as a result of that study. And I quote, "If future empirical work in this area demonstrates that managers fail to systematically enact the standards of behaviour resulting from more democratic stakeholder dialogue, it would then be necessary to develop enforcement mechanisms to ensure companies meet the moral responsibilities to a wide range of their stakeholders rather than to just those with economic power." So again, really, really fresh insight and fresh conclusions. And then what I really like about the acknowledgements in this paper is that he didn't sort of make it up and then sort of bung it out there and think how would it go. He acknowledged Richard Lachlan, Nola Burr, who will be a name from the past for several people, Dave Owen, Brendan O'Dwyer, the anonymous referees. And he then had presented this at an APERA, at a seminar in Edinburgh, at the British Accounting Association annual conference, an APERA, Asia Pacific Interdisciplinary Research and Accounting Conference, at a Social Environmental Accounting Research Conference, and in the Irish Annual Association. He didn't just sort of bung the work together. He took it, he tested it, he made sure that it made sense. He would have responded to many people's queries and criticisms as that was happening, and as a result has produced an absolutely another outstanding paper that again is still getting citations in the 30 to 40 each year. I don't know about you, but I dream about such things. Okay, it's a paper that's living still, that's working and making a big contribution. The second example is the Sustainable Development Goals. And these have been mentioned already this morning. They were produced in 2015 after the Millennium Development Goals, and they are also sometimes called the 2030 Agenda. All countries of the globe signed up to these as being the way of describing the thing that collectively we're trying to do. And they've got some really important components to them. They're intergovernmental, but obviously when a country signs up, then organisations can sign up as well, but also business itself has worked through and picked up how they can contribute to this. And Richard spoke very eloquently about how the accounting profession sees its role within these goals as well. So about 1 through to 7, these are the human needs. This is the flourishing of people and communities across the globe, which we don't currently achieve, but which we absolutely need to work towards trying to achieve. And then if we go right to the other end, number 16 and number 17, about the processes by which we might be able to build institutions to realise these outcomes. And if we go back a wee bit more, 13, 14, 15, this is the basis on which everything else happens. It's the ecology, it's the soundness of our ecological system that's so challenged in the current time. But then right across the middle, number 8, decent work and economic growth. Number 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure. Number 10, reducing inequalities. 11, sustainable cities and settlements. 12, responsible consumption and production. This is the core of the work where accounting and organisations can start to make a difference. And indeed, I'm going to tell you about, if you like, his and my journey through that particular frontier. So again, what happens is that, and there's only 3 people in this world that fit into this category. Sometimes people ring me up and they say, I was thinking. And if it's Ian, or if it's Carlos, who I know is here online as well, or if it's Jeffrey, I sometimes say yes then, because it makes it quicker, okay? So I was thinking, yes, I will. I often say, they say, you don't know yet. I know it's going to be good, so it'll be fine, okay? On this one, it was a funny phone call because I knew about the SDGs because of my sustainable development sort of policy work. I knew that there was nothing happening in our literature yet. I knew, but I wasn't as aware of Jeffrey was the deep engagement of the accounting profession and the professional services firms that we're looking at, because he was doing that legwork that Ian talked about, of reading their reports, of seeing what they were talking about, and seeing what kind of conferences and meetings were being had with the professional services firms in particular, and realizing there was a frontier here that was developing, but very the same idea as the shell work that nobody in our field was talking about yet. So this phone call wasn't the same I was thinking and I got to say yes, because he was dancing. He was dancing around the issue. He said, well, I don't know. You've probably heard of the SDGs. And then he ran through a whole series of things. And the whole time I'm thinking, I do hope he's going to ask me to participate. Otherwise, he's going to run me through all of this and say, Brendan and I are going to do some work together. I can't listen. It's like, no, pick me. I want to be on your team. And so he said, oh, I know you're really busy. And I was thinking, yeah, I know you're really busy too, but we never follow our own advice. And he said, would I want to work with them on this? To which the answer is really straightforwardly, yes, thank goodness you want to work with me on this. And so this started our journey in the SDGs, which is by no means over. So we started off with, an idea and a paper. We knew we were going to do a special issue. And so we had to negotiate a special issue with editors who are really, sound and wonderful, but for whom we were trying to propose a special issue about something that no one's writing about yet, which is always a bit of a hard sell. But we wanted to say, well, this will put a mark in your journal about these things. So he was canny. He knew the way editors thought about life, the things that editors like as being the first to put their mark on something. And then I said, well, if we don't write the first paper, nobody will know what we mean by the SDGs. And we were really worried that people would sort of spin off in all sorts of what we would find unhelpful directions. So we wrote a pre-paper, and we wrote it against quite a tight deadline. and it ended up winning an award, which was astonishing and really sort of interesting for that. But it set the tone for the special issue. We then had a workshop before the special issue to try to help people work up their ideas. Then it was the special issue itself, which involved a great deal of editing and co-editing. And then eventually the special issue came out and we wrote an editorial for that. So the idea of just sort of starting with, well, let's have a special issue, that is like a 3 or 4 year journey with all of these other steps that need to be in the place as well. So I would say something about his legacy, and I think it's in this one, it comes through really strongly. There's a stacking approach, and I really like things that stack because they do more. So there's scholarship, there's thoughtfulness, there's tough-mindedness, there is a large engagement with the world of policy and practice. Then it's negotiating with editors and knowing how to do that. There's editing, encouraging, planning, execution. And when you stack all of that on top of each other, you get somewhere with it, but it doesn't happen by chance. You have to design that in, and you have to learn how to do it. And I learned how to do a lot of this alongside Geoffrey. Then the last thing I'd say, which is on topic-wise, is on TCFD. And this is an area that Brendan was talking about, and I very much look forward to Brendan's work in this area because it's a really interesting thing that's coming to the fore. And it's going to be followed by the task force on nature-related financial disclosures as well. So this is using the capital markets as some kind of hinge to create a connection between ecology and economics. And right at the moment, we're sitting at a really interesting space in that hinge. So today, up the road in Glasgow, the Chancellor is going to formally announce, he's already pre-announced it, but it's going to formally announce the launch of something that requires investors to say how they can tell whether or not the investments they're making are green. And that requirement is already there through an EU program, but it's being replicated in Britain because that's the way we do things these days. And so what we're starting to see is, again, a stacking in this area. So we have corporate reporting, which came through Geoffrey's work in Shell, integrated reporting, and all sorts of other places. There's this investor disclosure that's going to be required. And that's really coming in under consumer protection. But if you say to me, I've got a green investment, and I say, how do you figure that out? That opens up a whole bunch of other questions. The Stock Exchanges Initiative, and particularly the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, is trying to make sure stock exchanges can deal with the problems that are coming their way. Then there's risk translation and communication, of which TCFD is a really important part of it. And so looking at this as a whole, we might be heading into, it would be very interesting, and whether or not it's effective is another question. But looking, that holistic look at things is really important in this context. And then, like my other colleagues, I'd like to say something about building institutions. So I was, and Ian Thompson spoke, I think, quite eloquently about this. And this is Geoffrey's final superpower, if you like, is that the Centre for Social Environmental Accounting Research, I was around as it was founded in 1991, 1990, more or less like that. And it had this Social Environmental Accounting Research Journal. And it did all right. It actually had a really long and great history coming from something called the Social Accounting Monitor. But it was at the stage that either it lifted its game or it disappeared. And so Geoffrey and I decided we were going to see if we could get it to lift its game. And we were the first co-editors that moved it from the Accounting Research Journal to the Accountability Research Journal. And firstly, you have to get your hands on that task. And that wasn't easy because someone else was doing it. And so you have to gently get yourself that job. Then we worked to get it to refereed status, and then to a journal publishing house, and then importantly to the next set of editors. And this is something that I think is sometimes quite hard to do when you're a senior academic, and that is to pass something on. So you don't need to hold something forever. You need to have something well designed, and as Lisa talked about, well governed, well laid out. And when you've done your bit, pass it on to someone else to learn from, to build and to do their bit, so they too can then pass it on. And I really like the journal has been passed on several times since that, and it's doing really well because that ethos is still there. We did the same thing with the Sustainability Accounting and Accounting book, which is, was an edited version. Jeffrey and Brandon and I went through 2 editions of that, and then it went on to some new contributors and collaborators who have just produced it, and it's beautiful and it's going to work really well. And then I guess I'm sort of coming full circle to a certain extent to what Angus Lang was talking about at the beginning, what Lisa Jack has talked about and what Richard Spencer has talked about. Is this building of institutions was it happened everywhere. In every bit of life that Jeffrey encountered, he built better institutions as a result of it. And in ways that many times we didn't know he was building the institutions, but there was always something better at the end of it as opposed to the beginning.